We want to begin by acknowledging our presence on the ancestral and unceded territory of the Tongva and Kizh Nation peoples and their neighbors from north to south, the Chumash, Tataviam, Katanamook, Serrano, Kuia, Peomkuichum, Ahashiman, Ipai Tipai, the Kumeyaay, and the Quechan peoples, whose ancestors ruled the region we now call Southern California for at least 9,000 years. Indigenous stewardship and rightful claims to these lands have never been voluntarily relinquished nor legally extinguished. We pay respects to the members and elders of these communities, past and present, who remain caretakers and advocates of the lands, river systems, and waters and islands of the Santa Barbara Channel. For a more detailed land acknowledgement authored by the USC Van Hunnick History Department, we invite you to visit their website, and I'll put the link in the chat shortly. My name is Martha Stroud, and I'm the Associate Director of the USC Dornsife Center for Advanced Genocide Research. And on behalf of the center and our co-sponsors for this lecture, the USC Mellon Humanities in a Digital World program, the USC Francophone Research and Resource Center, and the USC Spatial Sciences Institute, I'm very pleased to welcome all of you to the lecture. For those of you watching on Zoom, we'd love to know where you're watching from. It's one of our traditions to ask people to tell us where they're watching from, so please do so in the chat. And just for you, some protocols for Zoom. Right now you're viewing a side-by-side of the slides and the speaker, and I think you probably know by now you can make either side bigger or smaller. When Chris gets into showing some cool slides, you might want to make the slide bigger, and you can do that by dragging the dividing line in between the two windows. We will have time for questions and discussion following the lecture, so we invite and encourage, obviously, questions in the room. And for those of you on Zoom, please use the Q&A feature at the bottom, and we'll ask as many questions as we have time for. And we will share the chat and the Q&A with Chris following the lecture. So even if we can't read your comment or question aloud in the room, he will see it. For the protocol, for those of you here in person, thank you for coming. We have an inordinate number of tamales. Please help yourself. And there are also to-go containers. When the event has concluded, we encourage you to take many with you to go. And thanks for being here. So now to introduce today's speaker, it's my pleasure to introduce the founding director of the USC Dornsife Center for Advanced Genocide Research, Chappell Guerin Chair in Jewish Studies and Professor of History, Wolf Gruner.
Thank you, first of all, Martha and Grace for all the preparation which went into this event. Thanks you all for coming here in person and on Zoom. And briefly for those who don't know the Center for Advanced Genocide Research, a few short remarks. Since the foundation in 2014, the Center for Advanced Genocide Research here at USC tries to advance new areas of interdisciplinary research on genocide and mass violence. We promote especially the research with unique resources here at USC, for example, the collections of the Shoah Foundation Visual History Archive, the Holocaust and Genocide Studies Collection, and also archival collections we have here at Special Collections of the USC Libraries. With promoting this research, we try to further the understanding of the origins, dynamics, and consequences of mass violence, as well as the conditions and dimensions of resistance. We organize a rich academic program which consists of annual international conferences, and I will just highlight that within 3 weeks almost, or 2 weeks, we co-host the most important international conference in Holocaust studies, lessons and legacies, together with Claremont McKenna, and one day we'll be here at USC, and we will have on campus 200 scholars, more than 200 scholars from around the world specializing in Holocaust studies. We also have a lecture series as of today. We organize workshops, and we bestow numerous fellowships. And one of those is the Margie and Douglas Greenberg Research Fellowship. And we want to express our, as always, our deep gratitude to Margie and Douglas Greenberg, who were supporters of the center from the first day on and are still continuously supporting the center. So we are really thankful. I think this year's fellow is a testament for one of the things we really try to do to foster interdisciplinary research. We already started early on when we not only invited the Geographer Collective as research fellows to USC, but also we hosted and organized the first international conference on digital genocide studies. So I think this is a nice kind of talk in this tradition of interdisciplinarity. And this year's fellow is, and I hope you all kind of give him a warm welcome, Chris Anderson, and he is a PhD candidate in Geographic Information Science at Texas State University. His dissertation is titled, I think, similar to the talk, Landscape of Holocaust Rescue, at least for now. He while doing his PhD, actually before you started, you obtained a graduate certificate in GIS through our own USC Spatial Institute. He earned his Bachelor's of Science in Management at Binghamton University and later a Master in Divinity from Clark's Summit University, both with distinctions. He has an interesting career, which is not straightforward, but often helps to enrich actually our studies. So he served in the army as a chaplain from 2004 till 2013, and was later a pastor in 2 churches in the state of New York. He also worked as an agricultural and commercial real estate appraiser and business consultant. So you see, he is a man of very different kind of capabilities. And then he dedicated himself to create his own GIS company, the Nordic Geo Solutions, which serves both private and public clients. He already published in his area of research together with Alberto Giordano, one of our former fellows of the Geographer Collective and also an affiliated scholar of the center. He recently co-authored with him an article in Transactions in GIS titled "A Spatial Model for the Representation of Emotional Landscapes." He has participated in the European Summer Institute on the Holocaust and Jewish Civilizations in London, and also in several workshops and seminars, either in Holocaust studies or related to GIS and digital humanities. He also participated or gave presentations at a variety of conferences, also spanning kind of these kind of both sides of the aisle, so to speak, Holocaust studies and digital humanities. So please give a warm welcome to Chris Anderson.
All right, thank you, Wolf, and thank you, Martha. It's my distinct pleasure to be here, and I'd like to wish everyone a good afternoon or a good evening or good morning, depending on where in the world you are watching this from. First of all, let me just acknowledge and to thank the sponsors, Margie and Douglas Greenberg, of course, first of all, and I appreciate their support of this fellowship, and to be chosen as this research fellow was an honor indeed. And of course, the center, as well as my alumnus of Spatial Sciences Institute, and as well as USC Mellon Humanities, as well as the Francophone Research and Resource Center. So I'm very honored and humbled to be sponsored in this through all of these different venues. So I wanted to begin today with this quote from Marcel Proust, and I'll let you read it for a second. But as you're reading it, this to me explains why, as a geographer, I care about testimonies. Why do I care about Holocaust testimonies, and why are they interesting and important in terms of understanding perspectives? And I think for me, it just speaks to that importance of understanding, as it says, the universe that each of us beholds. And so how we can, I guess, get back to those primary sources is by looking at what people have said about their experiences in a given place. And so as a geographer, I'm interested in place, I'm interested in space, but place is how we would phrase experiences and lived experiences. And so Holocaust testimonies, as we're looking and researching into the events of the Holocaust, in particular, to me, are very relevant. So I just to kind of frame this in terms of the overall research, like what am I looking at overall? And so my area of focus is the Plateau Vivarais-Lignon in France, and my questions, I'm looking at the meaning of landscape for participants, both survivors and rescuers, how landscape and social networks interact or interacted, and then the distinctives, the spatial distinctives, if you will, of the plateau itself. And so my hypothesis is that the emotional and the linguistic landscapes will show synthesis around key themes and types of landscapes. So by linguistic landscapes and emotional landscapes, it's basically what did the participants that went through this area and or were rescuers in this area, how did they describe it? How did they feel? How did they, what topics did they discuss, in this place? And then how did the landscape affect social structure? And my hypothesis is that the effect would be strong based on doing social network analysis. And then lastly, the spatial analysis of the plateau will reveal various patterns, socially, economically, religiously, so forth, mirrored in the discourse. In other words, the way that they communicated in the testimonies, in the diaries, and the memoirs. So the context, so why am I doing this research? Like, what's the gap that it's trying to address? Well, first of all, Holocaust rescue, there's a wide range of books and articles that have come out on Holocaust research. So it's not so much that there's a big gap there, but of all probably different aspects of Holocaust research, rescue is probably one of the lesser studied ones. And then geography of Holocaust rescue is that much probably more or less so studied. And so in terms of understanding not only locations of rescue in the sense as a geographer, I would describe it as space, but place as well. So how is rescue perceived? How is it experienced? What kind of memories were constructed around rescue? And that, for sure, there's a lot of work to be done there. And then secondly, when we've looked at survivor testimonies, as a Holocaust geographer, let's call myself, like, we've done that in 1s and 2s, 3s and 4s, 5s and 6, right? A small number of testimonies. And so what I'm hoping is that through these methods that we can begin to access and address how can we read digitally, if you will, large numbers of testimonies at the same time, and what kind of insights could that give us in terms of experiences of survivors and others who have given their time to give these testimonies. And so to accomplish this, the workflow is a mix of traditional state-of-the-art natural language processing as well as AI. And I think when I started this, I was originally just going to do natural language processing in the traditional route, but AI is just, literally in the course of a few months, it just changes everything. So I've had to kind of say, hey, I really need to talk about AI. I really need to use AI and to understand what kind of results will this give us as well. Social network analysis, landscape metrics, which is perhaps an unusual avenue, but I'll talk about that later. And then traditional, I guess I would say, spatial analytics. And then to synthesize the result of all of these different things into trying to understand the meaning of landscapes in the past, particularly to try to recreate in whatever way that I can what the landscape of Holocaust rescue was, in particular in the plateau that I'm looking at. Okay, so I want to start this because we have a very, very diverse audience, ranging from historians to geographers to geographic information scientists to, anthropologists and sociologists and I mean, just, it's a very broad audience. So I thought I should start with defining some terms. So what is natural language processing? Well, essentially, to put it simply, it's the computer's way of reading a text and then telling us something about it. I mean, I don't know probably an easier way to try to define this. And it can tell us about semantics or meaning. It can tell us about sentiments and parts of speech and all the different things that it does. But generally, it's the computer reading a text and then giving us information about it at the end. Corpus linguistics, it's the study of a group of text and then comparing the text, the corpora, if you will, with frequency lists and collocations, concordances. Machine learning, that's algorithms that are trained on data, and from that data they produce models, and then those models then we can use to perform some kind of a complex task. I saw a quote that says, "Machine learning is the pathway to artificial intelligence." Well, what's that? Artificial intelligence is software that attempts to mimic human reasoning, cognitive abilities that we have, that computers are trying to mimic that. Decision-making, data analysis, language translation. So I guess one way to think about it is machine learning is a subset of AI, and then natural language processing is a subset of machine learning, as well as AI and linguistics and computer science. So they're related. And then what's a large language model? Because you've probably heard that term frequently lately. That's a type of artificial intelligence, so it's a type of AI that can understand and generate human language. So this is a generative technology. So it's generating, if you will, language about other language. And they're trained on massive amounts of data, textual data, and from that we can perform those natural language processing NLP tasks. And also, again, generate that original text. Okay, I'm going to talk about geoparsing. Well, what's that? All right, that's it's sort of in the realm of natural language processing, but also geography and GIS. That is reading the text, from that detecting places or locations, and then trying to resolve which place is it talking about, right? Is it Paris, France, or Paris, Texas, right? Okay, Geographic Information System, what's that? Well, simply put, that's a computer-based system that manages and analyzes information based on location. It's just a simple way, layman's terms. Okay, Holocaust rescue, like how do we define that? Because there's also various ways that we can define this. And different organizations have different definitions of what Holocaust rescue is. But this is my definition and only my definition, and it may conflict with other definitions out there. But I would define Holocaust rescue as the non-extortive assistance by both Jews and non-Jews to Jewish people experiencing persecution during Nazi rule or that of their allies and collaborators when such assistance was illegal. So it's a little different, like Yad Vashem, like they would define it strictly in terms of non-Jewish rescue efforts, but in this case, I'm broadening that out to include both Jewish and non-Jewish assistance during when such time was illegal and of danger to themselves. Okay, and then landscape. I'm going to throw that term around a lot, and in fact it's in the title of the talk. So I guess from my perspective, I take a lot of input from the French school, the German schools of geography in terms of how landscape is thought of there. And so I guess I don't want to say stolen, but I guess I appreciate what they have said about landscape. And to me, it really resonates and it makes sense from an academic standpoint. So landscape is the transactional, the cultural, the ecological space. And it has spatial structure, and it has relationships between all of these things. And in landscape, meaning is created, it's iteratively created through the spatial interaction of both human and physical features. Okay, so that's my definitions. All right, so the focus, the geographic focus, locational focus of my study is the Plateau Vivarais-Lignon, and it's south central France, and it's from the time period of 1940 to 1944. The plateau is about 500 square miles, give or take, 20 kilometers by 25, so forth. It's an isolated place, even today. It's cold and snowy in the winter, or it was. I don't know, with climate change, maybe less than it was. Interestingly, historically, it was a refuge for the Huguenots in the 16th through the 18th century. They were experiencing quite severe persecution, and many of the Huguenots left France, but a portion of them found refuge in this place. And that's important in terms of what happened there during the Holocaust, because if you listen to some of the testimonies and other things that have been written, you know, if you, especially by the rescuers themselves even, they will say, well, for us to offer help was something that we didn't even think about because, you know, we've been there ourselves, like in terms of experiencing persecution. So the other thing that I guess, you know, commonly perhaps isn't known about this place is even before the war, this was a place where children would come, stay parts of the summer. And I use the corollary in New York. We have the fresh air kids that come out of the city for the summer. And so it was kind of that idea. And so there were already structures, there were children's homes in place. You know, it was already, you know, known for that in terms of like getting out of the cities and out of the valleys, getting up on this high plateau and just, you know, it was already a place where children were coming. Okay, so I guess my first, you know, the first research question, which really is the one I'm focused on right now, and the one that I've been focused on since I've been here and before. So I'm trying to understand what the emotional and the semantic discourse, in other words, the language or the communication in the testimonies around Holocaust rescue on the plateau. And so I'm starting with testimonies, all the way in your far left, testimonies of survivors and rescuers. We don't have many rescuer testimonies, but we have a few. And then geonames, that's just a simple, like, hey, what were the names of these places up on the plateau? What were the names of the villages? Okay, so then from that, the first process, and they're both, one is through traditional natural language processing, the other one is going to be done through large language models, i.e. AI. We're trying to then take those testimonies, the text of those testimonies, and then recognize in the text, okay, here's a place, here's Le Chambon-sur-Lignon, or here's, you know, Saint-Agrève, or whatever, and like trying to recognize in the text that here's a place, right? Here's a location, if you will. And then from that, say, okay, then that leads to, we have a list of entities that it's detected. But there's also non-named spatial entities as well, which come into play, like the woods or the forest or the river or the village or the barn or the farm or, you know, whatever. I mean, just all these different non-named places. So we want to know about them too, because what kind of perceptions, what kind of memories were constructed around these places as well. Okay, and then we need to resolve, if you will, like I mentioned before, you know, Paris, France versus Paris, Texas. But just challengingly, I guess, for me, like it turns out that there's many Le Chambons in France. Okay, there's not just one, there's several of them. Okay, so if we're talking about Le Chambon-sur-Lignon, but oftentimes in the testimonies it might just say Le Chambon, we have to resolve this toponym resolution. We have to resolve what Le Chambon is the testimony talking about. And then as well, concurrently with that, so once we know the named and the non-named places, to do semantic analysis, which is, you know, what's being talked about for those places, sentiment analysis, is it positive, is it negative, and then emotion analysis. So like more than sentiments, but like specifically fear or anger or loneliness or feeling safe or secure. And so, you know, being able to, again, digitally detect what these things are. And then the result of all of this, hopefully, is a spatially interpolated, perhaps, emotional and semantic landscape of rescue on the plateau. So that's the overview. All right, some specific questions being asked then. Again, what was the emotional landscape of the plateau? Were there differences in how different landscapes, was the farm perceived differently than the forest? Was Le Chambon perceived differently than perhaps Saint-Agrève or somewhere else? What kinds of topics are being discussed in regard to the plateau? And then how do these findings nest within the larger historical, cultural context? And then lastly, I think as a geographic information scientist, as a digital humanist, I want to know, okay, I want to measure and I want to just acknowledge that some of this technology, isn't perfect. And so, but I want to measure that, and I want to have an objective way to say that are these tools useful, both to Holocaust studies and more broadly to geography and to GIS, and what kind of broader applications may they have? Okay, as you saw on the previous 2 slides before, it begins with testimonies. Okay, and so right now the Visual History Archive at USC Shoah Foundation has 4 testimonies dealing with the plateau that actually have transcripts. And so remember, I need transcript because I need to digitally read the text. So I can't just have the video or the oral recording. I actually need a transcript of that data. Okay, so right now there's 4. And I think it's important in this work that we preserve names of individuals because these are people and they're not just data. So I thought it was important to put their names and to highlight that who they were. So there's Grunhut and Fink and Feigl and Louan. And so they have given their testimonies as well as Louan and Feigl have their diaries. I obtained their diaries, their text of their diaries as well. So those 6 TXT files became my initial corpus, and they're essentially what I'm using to test my methods. All right, and so concurrently, while I've been here, I've also found the additional testimonies that would be relevant to this particular place that I'm interested in. And so there's 21 of them, 7 in English and 14 in French. And so we're going through the process of transcribing those using Otter and maybe some other things too. But and then also, it isn't just VHA, Visual History Archive testimonies that I'm also looking at, but USHMM, so the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum has testimonies. Fortunoff, Yale, has testimonies. And then Yad Vashem also has testimonies. So I'm also, if you will, gathering those testimonies together and transcribing and then bringing that into hopefully as much as I can a comprehensive data set of testimonies. Now, in natural language processing, there's this thing called pre-processing, and so that's where you take out the stop words like the and of and all these other words that are just kind of fillers, but they're necessary for speaking, and punctuation and bringing the word back to the root word and so forth. But I say here there's pre-processing because before I even get to that natural language processing, there's other things I have to do with it because the top is what the transcripts come out looking like. Okay, so there's you'll see it'll say INT at the very top, so that's the interviewer, and then PF, that's Peter Feigl, and then it has parenthetical pauses for 5 seconds or pauses for 3 seconds or laughs or cries the INT and the PF okay, that's pretty easy to take out. And I'm taking out the interviewer comments completely. That was a decision I had to make. Were the interviewer comments, were they helpful? Were they distractive? And I guess my thought is sometimes the interviewer comments or questions didn't necessarily then jive with what the survivor then was saying. So I just felt like there was much more risk of leaving those interviewer comments in than there was the benefits of leaving them in. So I took them all out. I also had to struggle with, do I take out the parenthetical comments of laughs or cries or pauses, because could that be indicative of certain emotional things? And I guess as I was watching the testimony, a lot of times the pause for 3 seconds not always, but a lot of times that's just a natural pause. So I thought it would be more distracting, so I took those out as well. And then I tried to like just, in the TXT file, bring everything together in a way that would be easier, quote unquote, for the computer to read. So the last couple paragraphs here, with the spelling out of Chambon, I just brought it down to this. So this is what from here and here looks like after I pre-processed it, and then do the natural language processing, pre-processing on it, and take out those stop words and so forth. So it's it's a long process, which is partially why we haven't examined hundreds or tens or hundreds or thousands of testimonies, because it's so labor intensive, if you will, to actually get meaningful results. Okay, so with the use of that initial corpus, so there's, remember, 4 testimonies and 2 diaries, what have my results been so far? So I'm going to talk about each of these in turn. So geoparsing, remember geoparsing, it's basically this idea of geotagging or recognizing, hey, here's a toponym or here's a location, and then there's this idea of then resolving which it is. Okay, so is it Le Chambon-sur-Lignon or is it a different Le Chambon? So that's also called geocoding or disambiguation. So I'm using this, again, because we have a very broad audience, I'm using this computer language called Python. And within Python, there's this thing called a library or a package called GeoParser. Well, that's just a collection of code that somebody has written to do a task. Okay, so GeoParser is a Python package or a library that does a certain thing. Okay, and there's all kinds of packages and all kinds of libraries out in Python and R and all these other languages that do all of these different things. So I had to, in a sense, identify one that was usable, seemed to have good, the literature about it seemed to be, that it was reliable and that it had good results. So I'm using this GeoParser package in Python to do this geoparsing step. Okay, so then how to measure results, right? Because, you run the text. So I take all these TXT files, those 6 text TXT files, and I run them through the GeoParser after writing all the code to do it. So how do I measure the results to say, is this accurate or not? Well, in the literature on geoparsing, there's this idea that accurate is within 161 kilometers. That there's also this idea of mean and median error distance, and then there's this area under the curve. And area under the curve quantifies the area that the smaller the area, the more accurate the results were. Well, as somebody who's looking at Holocaust testimonies, like 161 kilometers to me, it had ethical issues. Because 100 meters can be the difference between being in a camp and not. It can be the difference between, being interned and being free. Life and death, literally. So 161 kilometers just, to me, that just doesn't, it's not applicable. It's not relevant to what I'm trying to do and trying to measure. And the other thing is, within 161 kilometers, I think there's 3 Le Chambons. Right? So within, I think, 20 kilometers, there's 2. So it's just not going to work. So I came up sort of with my own, alternative measures of results. And so and I'll talk about these in a couple slides, but I'm looking at recognition precision. I'm looking at resolution precision, and I put it down to 5 kilometers. So you see that's a little different than 161. I'm looking at recognition recall, and then F1, and I'll talk about all of these things. So I do apologize. It's going to get technical here the next couple slides. So just, bear with me, and we'll bring it all back, and hopefully it'll be understandable. Now, when I first ran the 6 TXT files, the 4 testimonies, and the 2 diaries through GeoParser, I'll put it this way. The out-of-the-box resolution precision was 38%. So, and that in particular was on Le Chambon, right? It just wasn't figuring out that it was Le Chambon-sur-Lignon, even though, it's supposed to be able to understand context and all of these other things, like it just wasn't getting it. So what did I do? Well, I trained my own custom model. So I used machine learning and I trained my own custom model. And it took 5 different iterations before I finally was satisfied with my results. Okay, so here's this idea of recognition. So toponym recognition. So there's a place or there's a location mentioned in the text, and how well is it able to detect that that location's there? So hopefully on the chat you can see it well, but here it's hard to see. The very top one is Le Chambon-sur-Lignon. So in the document, there was 50 references to Le Chambon-sur-Lignon, but it only recognized 42 of them. I mean, you go down through, there's different ones, but a couple of them I was kind of being hard on the geoparser because, like, the Collège Savinol is actually a school, so I probably wouldn't have known that anyways. But I was like, I just want to know, like, how well is it able to actually pick these things up? Now, Les Crayons is actually a children's home, and there is a Les Crayons in France, but it's not that one, but it picked it up 3 times, but it was wrong all those 3 times, right? Because it was a school, actually, in Le Chambon as well, and it's not sophisticated enough to know that. But out of 153 references, locational references, it picked up 122. Okay, so then here's my metrics in terms of results. Now this is where it's going to get really techy, in a sense. But so there's this idea of true positives. Okay, so true positives are, yes, it was a location, and yes, it got it. Okay, then there's true negatives. No, it was not a location, and it didn't say it was. Okay, so good. All right, false positives is, it said it was a location, but it wasn't. And then a false negative is it should have got it, but it didn't, right? It didn't pick it up that it actually was there. So it like said, no, that's not a location, but it really was. Okay, so again, I said I would try to explain all these different measures. So recognition precision is you take the true positives that were recognized divided by the sum of the true positives recognized plus the false positives recognized. So essentially, it's the 122 divided by 122 plus 3. So it actually came out pretty good. So almost 98% recognition precision. So that's pretty good. Now after precision. So again, this is the 5 kilometer thing. How well did it actually say it was this Le Chambon? Well, after training my own model, after 5 iterations, my accuracy rate went from 38% to 89%. So I was pretty happy with that. Now, the data that I trained it on, because like, well, how did I train the model? Well, I trained it on actual testimonies. And so I had to say, well, when this survivor talked about Le Chambon-sur-Lignon, or just Le Chambon, or Chambon, or Chambon-sur-Lignon, there's 4 or 5 different ways it was said. Every time they said it, here's the geoname, and there's a code that each place has in this geoname database, which is it's an open source thing online. I think it's managed in Europe, I think, but it's open source, and so it would know that, oh, it's that particular location with these coordinates. All right, and so I would train the model, and so I had, basically almost the whole data set. I went through and I said, all right, when it's talking about this village, it's this. When it's talking about this village, it's this. And so I went through, and then I trained the model on that over and over and over and over and over. And then eventually got that, okay, Le Chambon-sur-Lignon is Le Chambon-sur-Lignon, and Le Chambon is also Le Chambon-sur-Lignon, and so forth. All right. Then recognition recall is the true positives divided by the true positive plus the false negatives. So that would be the 122 plus or over divided by the 122 plus the 31 that it didn't recognize. So that's actually the previous slide. So in a sense, but there was a couple anyways, there's a couple false positives in there too. But that came out to 80%, and that's even including the schools and the children's homes and stuff. If I take those out, my recognition recall goes up to like 85%. So that's pretty good. And then my F1 score, which is basically a composite of recognition, recognition precision and recognition recall, that came out to almost 88%, so it's just trying to, it's like a weighted average of the two measures, and it's trying to figure those out. All right, so I was pretty happy then with the geoparsing. Like, I've got a model now that actually works pretty well. For this place, that's the key. Like, it works for the plateau. And so maybe as we're, as geographers, we're thinking about like an application broader, like if I'm trying to geoparse a given, set of documents that are about a given place, maybe I need to train a data set that has documents that deal with that place. Because oftentimes the trouble with machine learning is it's trained, and even AI, it's trained on social media stuff, tweets and, all these other things that are just all over the board, right? So if we have a really focused data set, we can train those machine learning models much better and to give us much better accuracy. Okay, so then the next step is this idea of a rules-based natural language processing. And I guess I want to acknowledge there's a gentleman by the name of William Mattingly, and he's published a lot on Python for digital humanities. And so, some of what his methodologies there I thought were fantastic. So I've been using some of them. So a rules-based natural language processing, we create custom rules in the pipeline. In the natural language processing thing, it's called a pipeline. And so we put in these custom things in the pipeline and say, all right, do these things as well. And so what do I care about? Well, I care about villages on the plateau, again, so that kind of goes back to geoparsing, but this is a little different. This is this rule. I care about children's homes, schools. I'm also interested in looking at Jewish and non-Jewish organizations active in rescue. I think there's a lot to be gained by like how much reference in the testimonies were to these different organizations, and can we qualitatively, quantitatively gain some knowledge out of researching what the differences in the different organizations that were involved. Because oftentimes we think of rescue in a non-Jewish way, but I think that's completely wrong in terms of if you look at the testimonies and how many Jewish organizations were active in rescue completely. And I think that perhaps, at least commonly, anyways, in the Holocaust studies we know this, but commonly there it probably isn't as well acknowledged. And geographical features, so again, woods and forests and so forth. So this is in addition to the other normal natural language processing that Spatie does. And what is Spatie? Okay, that's another Python library. It's a very powerful natural language processing library that's very well known. It's very powerful, does many things, and it does them very well, actually. And so this rules-based thing, then it gives us an ability to do other things with it, such as aspect-based sentiment analysis, which I'll talk about in a minute. So this is the results of that same bunch of, that same group of testimony that we saw from Peter Feigl earlier. That I said here's the base transcript, and then here's the after I did the pre-processing. So this is what the rules-based NLP does, natural language processing. So it's giving me dates, it's giving me feature. Now as a train of feature, well, I threw it in there because I think that's an important thing, especially with the plateau and many other aspects of this time. It's got Le Chambon sur Lignon, it's got Daniel Trachme, it has Lake Grillon, the children's home. So it picked it up pretty well. And then a little bit further, again, it has this particular home, so there's another feature. The village is a feature, the plateau is a feature, the mountain is a feature. Interestingly, though, you see there's a mistake, right? Because of the way the text, the transcription came, it says pastor of the Le Chambon. So it's like a double the. So the or the le. So it messed it up, right? It didn't get that. It said that was a facility, and so it didn't get that it was one thing, right? So it isn't perfect, right? But what this does is it gives us the ability to read the text and to detect aspects that we might be interested in, to give us the ability then to do research with it, right? So again, if we're interested in geographical things or entities involved in rescue or other aspects of what was happening at the time, we can create a rule and say, all right, well, tell me all of these things and pick them out for me, right? And then the color coding, if you don't like the colors, that's on me. I picked the colors. All right, so then the next thing that I'm looking at is topic modeling. So this is like the, in terms of semantics, like what, we talk about the semantic discourse. So I guess I'm thinking of this in terms of like, what are they talking about? What topics are the people in the testimonies discussing? And so there's all kinds of different approaches, and this is going to get techy, and I'm really not going to go into it too much because it's very techy. But it just uses this idea of probabilistic clustering, right? And I'll just say that the most common model is this LDA model, and that's the one that's most used. The weakness of it, though, is that we have to tell it what topics are, how many topics do we want to run the model with? And so that, is kind of random. And then once you do results, if you do it 2, 3, 4, 5, 10 times, it's going to give you different results every single time. So you're like, okay, well, but it gives us interesting data that then we can work with. Unfortunately, more advanced models, such as this top to vec, I can't do it on the data set I have. I tried, but it would be statistically unreliable because I need a huge data set to talking like thousands, tens of thousands of documents to really do top to vec. It just doesn't work. Okay, so then in Python, I use Gensum, and I use this PyLDA viz, which is the visualization. And so the steps were essentially I had to pre-process, then it creates this bag of words, which is like a listing of all the words in the text. Then you run the model, and then you analyze the coherence of the model, of the topics in the model. So how coherent are the topics? And then you fine-tune it, and then you optimize the model. And so I went through this optimization process, and you can see, like, based on the number of topics, how coherent is it? So the topics is on the bottom, coherence is on the left. And so you can see generally as you go up, it's not the best curve in the world because my sample size is too small. But what it's telling me is that 34 is the optimum number of topics that I want to try to detect. Okay, so then what were my results? Okay, so now I cut everything off just to try to fit things in here. But essentially, this is my number one down here. This is my number one topic. Okay, so that what is that number one topic talking about? Well, in the room you can't see it really well, but it's talking about children in the village, Jewish children in the village who came, and it talks about time and people. And so there's, this is where the qualitative part comes in because it doesn't like give me the answer. I have to interpret this, all right? And then the second topic is, it basically, so in Chambon, it's talking about the people of Le Chambon, essentially, in the village, and so it's more about, so the first topic seems to be about the Jewish children that are there. The second topic seems to be about the people of Le Chambon themselves. And then the number 4 topic, which is way in the different quadrant, and the farther away they are in these quadrants, the less similarity between the topics are. So I picked number 4 because it was kind of out. So it's talking about essentially the school and the Jewish children in the school. It talks about January. I don't know why January came up, but it did. But maybe because it was cold. I don't know. But this is where interpretive part comes in. So, and this is you can play with this and you can change. You can highlight number 28 or 33 or whatever, and it can tell you what was the list of words that it thought. And again, it's just an estimate. The algorithm thought this was a topic. Okay. There's this idea of book natural language processing, again, within Python. And that can look at larger documents as a whole. Now, I don't have a really big document, but if I if we ever have to the point where we can analyze 100 testimonies or 1,000 testimonies, and all at once, what kind of insights could it give us to that, that corpus of much larger number of documents? So it uses similar computational analytic techniques. I think it seems to be useful for character and event analysis in particular, and I'll show you in just a second. So again, could it give us more insights into something bigger? But here's the character analysis. So, for example, no, it doesn't like accents, but trachme. All right, so it says referential gender he. Then what did he possess? Well, he possessed his bicycle, right? But then it has all these other things where he was the agent. In other words, he had agency. He was the active doer of the verb. So, trachme has, he expects, he gave, he released, he takes. And then patient, that means like what action did he receive? Madame Philippe, she was the most mentioned of all. She had a door, she had a husband, I guess, which would be Monsieur Philippe. But she says, she reminds. The Germans, they abandoned, they took, they left, they did, they occupied, they bothered, right? But then somebody fought the Germans, so they also were receivers of, right? So it can give us some insights, right? Particularly into people, into characters. And I say that not in any disrespect to living. These were living people, not just characters in a fictional work, but essentially the people in the documents that can tell us something about them and how they interacted with others. So it gives us some insights. I'm also had the ability to look at this sentiment analysis, and it's aspect-based sentiment analysis, which is a little bit more precise. So it's just called ABSA, not ABBA, the 70s Swedish band, but ABSA. So basically it's answering the question, are the opinions in the text, are they positive, are they negative, or are they neutral? And so it gives a score. And then it, again, measures this polarity, including emotional intensities. And you can do it at the sentence level, the document level, or the whole corpus. There's all these different models. There's lexicon-based, there's supervised machine learning models. And so then aspect-based sentiment analysis, which I'm particularly interested in, looks at sentiment around given terms of interest. So I want to know what's the sentiment around a toponym, a place, like for example, Le Chambon, or what's the sentiment around woods or river or whatever, right? So that's what that aspect-based sentiment analysis gives us the ability to do. All right, so basically I use Spacy to create my aspect list, and Spacy again is that Python thing. And then I used TextBlob, which is it's a funny name. It's kind of like, the medicines come out and they try to think up new names for all these medicines and prescription drugs. And they come up with the weirdest names. Like I think of that in terms of like packaging in Python or R. They come up with some of the weirdest names for like some of these things. But anyways, so TextBlob is lexicon-based, but you actually can create your own supervised model, and it performs sentiment analysis. And then at the end of the day, it gives you polarity. So -1 is like, hey, that's a really negative sentiment. 0 is it's neutral, and 1 is it's positive. And then subjectivity means like how, just as it said, how subjective was the person as they were like describing this thing. So 0, it's objective or factual. 1 is it's a very subjective statement. And so my initial results, first of all, I'm still trying to get that aspect-based working better than it was. So I'm not like, and I've got a good idea, I think, how I want to attack it and get it to work better. But I'm giving you like the initial results just at the sentence level, not so much focused on the aspect side. But it'll still show you kind of what the idea is. So these are right from testimonies. So the person says, at first I didn't know where I was or what it was. So the sentiment, and I think this is when one of the survivors showed up in Le Chambon. They didn't know where they were. So the sentiment polarity, they're saying it's kind of neutral, like it's closer to 0. But it's, it's got a little bit of subjectivity. Second sentence, I discovered later after the war, many years after the war, that Le Chambon was the most unique village in France. And I would think, like, just because I know historical context, like, hey, that's a very nice sentiment. But unique, right, can go either way. And so the sentiment analyzer doesn't know, right, the historical context, it just says unique. Well, it can be uniquely bad too. So I think it gave it a slightly positive polarity, and then pretty subjective statement, 0.6. Okay, it is located about 3,000 feet elevation in the Massif Central on the Central Mountain chain in France. All right, so that's completely neutral, right? And it said that's right. I mean, they've got it right? I mean, that's a pretty neutral statement, just describing where it is. All right, here's on the other side. It was sort of isolated on a desolate plateau, very cold in the winter, windswept plateau. Well, it picked it up. This is negative, right? Negative 0.78. So it understood that this was, on the negative side of opinion, but highly subjective, right? I like snow and cold, so I'd be like, hey, this is great. So agriculture was pretty rudimentary. So it's, again, closer to neutral, but it's saying it's very subjective. And then this, I think, is an interesting sentence. So Le Chambon was a fantastic place. Now, I would have said, like, that's a 1 polarity. Because, like, I don't know, I guess you could say a very, very, very fantastic place, but it only gave it a polarity of 0.4. Shouldn't it be a 1? But it's not. So, and it's also subjective. But I would, again, it shows that none of these tools are perfect, right? And we can't use them in a vacuum and just, say, oh, voila, like it gave us this great answer, and now we know everything about, what survivors said about Le Chambon. Like, no, like it has to be taken with a grain of salt and used with, in the greater context of what we know about the individual testimonies. Okay, so in this first phase, still to come, if you will, I still have to get working if you will, in Python and trying to get the actual emotional classification. So sentiment is one thing, positive, negative, right? But there's also emotional classification, like in terms of those actual emotions, from happiness, joy, down to anger and fear and, isolation, all these other things, right? So, like, I need to get that working, if you will. And then I also need to test and compare the results of large language models with traditional. So Spacie, again, that package in Python, just came out very recently with their own large language model, which is integrated with the natural language processing. And I'm actually very excited about that. It sounds kind of nerdy, but I am. I think that could be really a game changer in terms of large language models that actually can do natural language processing well. Because Spacie is so powerful in what it does, integrating the two of them, I think, is a fantastic idea. And then ArcGIS, which is that's a Geographic Information System software produced by Esri. They have their own deep learning toolbox. And I was at the Esri user conference in July, and I talked at length with their text AI specialist about how to use this and how to make it work for what I was doing. So I ran it once, and so this is on the 6 different documents. And so this is what ArcGIS comes out with their detect entities in a text. And so you can see the very first document. So each line is one of the documents. So one of the testimonies or one of the documents. So the first document, it didn't pick up Le Chambon at all. It picked up the Haute Loire, which is where Le Chambon is. And here it split Cham with Bone between location and geopolitical area. Here it did not. It didn't get Le Chambon-sur-Lignon at all. Here it put it over in geopolitical area rather than location. And then, again, this did the same thing in this one. And then finally, the last one, it got Le Chambon and then Toulouse. It just threw out of nowhere. So AI, right, needs work. And what the guy told me in July was, he said, you're going to have to really, you open up our API, which is a techie term, but open up all the documentation that we have about which they share, and you're going to have to train your own models to make this thing work. But I'm excited about that ArcGIS is including this. It's particularly a text model. it's probably more meant for like tweets and things like that. But I think we can use it as geographers, as as geographic information scientists, we can use it, to help us, do mixed methodology. But it just needs work, right? It's less than perfect. Okay, so still to come. Again, I need to visualize. We have, I want to do basic hotspot analysis in the GIS. I want to do predictive models, such as spatial interpolation. And then the result of all this will be the semantic and the sentiment and the emotional landscapes of the survivors and the rescuers' experience on the plateau. And then eventually I'd also like to create this coordinated multiple views. So like if you have the testimony up, you have you can click on like a place, it'll show you either the sentiment analysis or the emotional analysis, then it'll show you the map of Le Chambon. So that's at the end of that process. Then there's a second phase, which again, I'm using historic aerial photos. I'm just gonna run through this real quick because I'm running out of time. Which those of you that know me really well are not surprised at all. So, again, starting with testimonies, but then looking at historic aerial photos, and then running these kinds of semantic and sentiment analysis through these photos. So I'm looking at how social structures in rescue correlate, how the language describing different non-named spatial entities, such as forest, farm, and village, correlate with materiality of the place. And then I'm looking at the internal arrangement of the landscape via remote sensing. So looking at typical land use, land cover classification, landscape metrics. And that, in a sense, I'm trying to look at homogeneity, fragmentation, adjacency, corridors in the landscape, change within the landscape, and how that affected social networks. So this is Le Chambon-sur-Lignon in 1947. And this is a result of 17 aerial photos that I created an orthomosaic out of, and then did land classification from. So this is village, this is woods, this is cropland, and then this brownish is kind of like cropland that's reverting to forest. But from that, what were these networks? How strong were they? Did physical proximity result in social connection? Did certain landscapes, because of that connectivity measures, did it bring people together? Did it keep them apart? What was the relationship between the materiality and the metrics and actually how these places function? How are they perceived? And then did these landscapes act not only as transactional space, in other words, places where life activities happen? I was working on the farm, or I was studying in school, but beyond that as a cultural and a living space. And then how is agency expressed by survivors, rescuers, and the landscape itself, because the landscape has agency, right? It was cold or it was isolated. I mean, that is in a sense agency of the landscape as well. And then the very last, the third phase is I'm going to take, I would say traditional spatial analytics, looking for distinctives of these places, and then compare that, with the spatial distinctives. Does that correlate well with the language that the survivors have used to describe? Okay, and then expected results. I'm hoping again to understand meaning of landscape for the survivors and the rescuers with this comparison of materiality with the language that's used to describe. And then in terms of how does this contribute to scholarship? Well, hoping to focus on, again, understanding meaning in this integration of spatial analytics and social network analysis, remote sensing, natural language processing, large language models, to give us, again, a geographical approach to Holocaust rescue. And then hopefully it provides for both geography and Holocaust studies, how can we address many, many, many testimonies, not just a few? And what kind of research could we do with information like that? And what insights could perhaps we gain? And then I just want to add, there's a lot of work being done in this field already, particularly even in Holocaust studies. I mean, there's groups in the UK, here in the US, that are, in a sense, trying to attack the same problem. And so I guess I'm joining alongside of them in this effort. Just to mention limitations, like Holocaust testimonies by definition exclude the murder, right? So we have, a responsibility to remember that and to acknowledge that. Holocaust rescuers, the number of testimonies we actually have from them are extremely small number of actual documents. So it's very selective and just limited by that. And any historical documentation is obviously subject to error. And lastly, my own biases as the researcher. So I just want to give an additional thank you to Texas State and to the Department of Geography and Environmental Studies, and of course my committee and Alberto as the chair. So with that, I'll take questions and thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much. And just a reminder to those of you on Zoom to ask questions using the Q&A feature. And Chris, you can just call on people.
Okay, sure. Okay. Yeah. Any questions here in the room?
So how do you view resistance in the events that happened in France and rescue as resistance in France?
So there's after the war, resistance in France was thought of as this realm of armed resistance, right? It was thought of as, the Maquis and de Gaulle and, the heroic resistance of France. And so in a sense there was this myth, perhaps, that might have exaggerated the scope of resistance in France versus collaboration. However, rescue, though, was never considered for years and decades like part of the resistance. It was always like this nebulous thing that was kind of out there. If you look at a lot of the literature after the war in terms of how resistance was described. But in the last, several decades, the last few decades really, the acknowledgement has been that resistance wasn't just armed resistance, but it was in, things like helping people to have food or shelter, giving them fake identification cards, or helping them to get to Switzerland or wherever it may be, or just giving them just a hand for a day or whatever it was. But rescue as resistance, I think, has been increasingly recognized. But I guess I would consider it, rescue as resistance, again, not just for the non-Jewish organizations, but certainly it was a very, I think, important form of Jewish resistance. And certainly if you look, and that's why I think it's really interesting to be able to, using that rules-based natural language processing, to say, hey, we have all of these Jewish organizations, and let's create a rule to try to find them in the testimonies, right? And then we have all these other non-Jewish organizations, and let's do a comparison. Like, how often is in France the OZ, the OSE, how often does that come up? How often does this one come up or that one come up? And I think my hypothesis, so this is really not part of the research, but my hypothesis, I think it would come up more than we think. So, good question. There was a question in the back.
I was wondering if the tools that you're using, one of the challenges of indexing Holocaust testimonies is that survivors will talk about locations. As you mentioned, there will be the same name, places with the same name, really close to one another. Mm-hmm. And I wonder if these, the kinds of tools that you're using might be able to help by listening to testimony and determining where that specific location is, and parsing that out.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think. Yeah. So the question, just for those of you online, was, as we try to index Holocaust testimonies and other, survivor testimonies from different other genocides, it's sometimes difficult to again resolve which place is that person talking about, and could these tools help with that process? And I think it could. I think it can depend on, as I showed earlier, if you want to create a model that will be accurate, you have to have very, at least my experience so far, an accurate model is based on data that you're using to train it very specific to that area. So if you had a set of testimonies that, hey, you generally knew, hey, they were in the south of France or whatever, or they were in, wherever, you would train the data to be about those areas, and then you could like perhaps use that model then to be able to do that geoparsing, and then perhaps that would help the indexing process to be more accurate. Indexing is, it's hard. You've got to listen to hours of testimony, and sometimes it, like we ran into in the last, I've been here, a month, and it's been fantastic, but we ran into a few testimonies where there was a couple words that were said, a couple places that sound like Le Chambon, but they're not. Even like not even Le Chambon, one of the other Le Chambons. It's just a different name, but it sounds similar. And so it would be easy to index that incorrectly. And so if these tools perhaps could give us a way to help that index process. So yes, Charlotte.
Thanks so much for a really great lecture. I just was wondering how you located the testimonies that you were drawing upon for your research.
I used the index terms, the keywords, yes. So the question was, how did I locate the testimonies and the transcripts that I used? Well, I used, in the Visual History Archive, they have a good search function based on the index. And, there's the whole process that the indexing went through, and, that's subject, as we said, to different challenges. But I started with that. So I did a keyword of location, and then did Le Chambon-sur-Lignon or some of the other locations up there. And then I searched for those with transcripts. Now we've got these other 21 that we've identified. So I did a search, a much broader search, transcripts or not. And then I had to go through every one of those hits. There was like 30 or 40 of them, and I had to pick out, because there was some where they were only in Le Chambon after the war, or they just talked about Le Chambon because it was a famous place and they had heard about it, but they weren't actually there. So I had to eliminate all of those, because it's indexed correctly, in a sense. That's a correct indexing, because they did talk about Le Chambon-sur-Lignon, but they weren't actually there. So I'm trying to get survivors that actually were there. So, yeah.
So have you ever considered then as well, looking beyond just the testimonies that were tagged with like Le Chambon, and considering the ways in which, because the index is full of terms that have to do with geographical features.
Sure.
You clearly know the plateau very, very well, and you considered the ways in which you can begin looking at a wider range of terms that could gesture towards the plateau.
Yeah, so the question was, have I looked at other terms that could perhaps point me toward the plateau? And so, actually I identified one testimony that wasn't even coded for Le Chambon at all, but she was there. And I think I found that one just looking up. I think the keyword was rescue. And so I just went, and if you just type in rescue, you're going to get hundreds, actually thousands of, I think there's a couple thousand testimonies that hit rescue. So, but you could also, I tried searching by the river, like the Lignon, and by the way, Le Chambon-sur-Lignon has just, I guess, recently gone through a terrible period of flooding. So just as we talk about now, they're going through something with this very river. So yeah, I think it's challenging, right? Because the indexing is not perfect. So am I potentially missing some? Probably. I guess I'm assuming that that's possible, but without sitting through, looking and listening to 2,000 of them, that would be yes or in the back.
A very interesting project, I think, and I have kind of like a suggestion, a thought, and a question, I guess.
Sure.
Suggestion, maybe just think about some of the tools that you're using is to just put what the limitation is, because I heard it'd be good if it could process a larger volume, but then I think about some like Google AI Studio, Google Notebook, which can process large amounts of documents.
Right.
So yeah, that's just kind of like suggestions for the limit of the current tools.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Whatever that might be.
Yep.
But the last thing I think was really an interesting point, the last slide about what we're not hearing from the folks who were murdered. And I was just curious if, there's this trend, I guess, or some tools are being used to bring people they're back to life, or so do you just roughly, do you have any sense of if that could be done for some of these, to use AI to give them voice about what they might have said?
Interesting. We were just talking about this. There was was he a former fellow or who was in my position? How many years ago? A few years ago. Who he's developed some digital tools to using natural language processing, and I'm sure it's probably evolved to more AI, where he's taking survivor testimonies and he's trying to parse from them references and words and experiences of the murdered. So he's actually trying to pull out from those testimonies, what are the experiences of the people who don't have a voice because they were killed, right? And so his tools have actually been addressing that very same thing, right? And I think it's fascinating. Like I saw it, I was like, wow, this is pretty amazing. So I think that's a whole realm that I think is just there. So yeah, fantastic. Wolf.
Yeah, so to bridge this kind of divide between the different disciplines, for me as a historian, I'm kind of struck how much work you put into like these small things, right? What you described in the beginning. I mean, this is hours, weeks, months of work, and you work with 6 testimonies. As a historian, I would say I read these 6 testimonies, and I know what the people think.
Mm-hmm.
So, but I think what you try to do is something which relates to this question with the not let them speak who are murdered, but I think more what I understood is to kind of trying to come from the anecdotal, which would be one transcript or the testimony which I read,
Mm-hmm.
and somebody is saying something about Chambon,
Mm-hmm.
From the anecdotal to the kind of a more quantitative kind of judgment,
Mm-hmm.
what people thought, what the networks are. So that's what we can't kind of extrapolate when I just read the testimony. Am I on the right?
Yeah, for
path
sure.
there?
Yeah, we're in a sense we're trying to synthesize, right? We're trying to synthesize many testimonies into some coherent understanding of perspectives, right? And so an individual survivor, and I think, and this is the struggle like, ethically I have, is as we're amassing multiple testimonies, like. That's why I said in the beginning, like I don't want to lose the voice of any one individual because enough violence, as we say, has been done to them already, right? So, but at the same token, what insights can we gain? So I would say yes, it's a synthesis of like how we look at one versus many, and then what insights can we gain through that synthesis of those different testimonies. And yes, it is a lot of work, and I guess I'm hoping to automate some of that pre-processing work, because even at 30 testimonies, that's just too much work. So how can I write some code to do all the things that I did manually? But yes, perfect.
I would like to echo Wolf's awe and astonishment at the amount of work that you've done, and I think what I find so impressive is you are doing work with these tools computationally that will have an impact on that field, regardless of what kind of data people are working with. And then you're bringing those tools to Holocaust studies, and you're going to change what people think about this region or potentially many other regions if these tools are applied in similar ways. So I just think it's extremely exciting. And I just want to mention about you've made a few mentions of things that you've noticed that were incorrect in the testimonies or the indexing, and I just want to mention that you've actually contributed corrections to the archive, so this is part of this symbiotic relationship between the scholars that we host and the VHA and the Tome Foundation, that your work actually now, your expertise on this region has now had an impact on the archive, and these corrections will be reflected, in an update, in the next update. So I guess because we are out of time almost for questions, I guess the big question I have is, how is this going to change? How is the research that you're doing going to change kind of what the popular conception is of this region? of rescue in this region. I mean, it may be just that it illuminates what rescue was in this region, because certainly I had never heard of this region before myself. But even for those who have heard about it, how is the analysis that you're doing with these tools, what's the potential for how it's going to change how people see this?
I mean, as a scholar, I guess I just try to be objective and say it could just affirm, I mean, it could just completely affirm common perceptions of the plateau and the Vivarais-Lignon, or it could challenge those perceptions. I mean, again, looking at even 30 testimonies is, you know, that's enough data, I would say, to give us a pretty good understanding from those 30 individuals, including some rescuers, how, you know, how memory was constructed around this place. And does that constructed memory then have consistency with perhaps, you know, both, you know, I would say commonly held perceptions or understandings of the place, scholarly perceptions of the place, and the, you know, memory is an interesting thing, right? And memory is, you know, and most of these testimonies were 50 years after the fact, right? So the whole process of how we remember things is a whole thing that opens up too. And, you know, and most of the testimonies were taken after, you know, the Webs of the Spirit came out, and, you know, and then there was some other, Philip Haley's book and a couple other books that came out in the late 70s, early 80s, and so on. And so, you know, the place got known, right? And then so I wondered, you know, as we make memory, what did that trigger in the memories of the survivors? And then, you know, in 1995, I'm asked to give my testimony. And so how do these things all interrelate? And to me, it's absolutely fascinating. Like, and I think that's, as a scholar, like, to me, that's really interesting. Like, how is place constructed, a memory of place 50 years afterwards, and then after it became well known in the popular press and PBS and so forth. So I don't know. I mean, that's the fun thing, is like it could completely affirm everything we thought we knew about Lichtenbonn, or it could challenge in terms, I mean, as a geographer, I guess I'm interested in that, you know, that emotional side and that meaning side. Like, what did it mean of this little place? I mean, it was a little place, 500 square kilometers. That's pretty small. So yeah, well.
I mean, just to add to this, because I think you already mentioned one important aspect as a result. Earlier on, you said you might have to change our perception that, for example, Jews save Jews, right? And this is a very important kind of result already, because the trend is to just look at non-Jewish rescue. And then I think what you have as an advantage, that you actually start with the rescued.
Right.
As a source, while most research on rescue starts with the rescuer. That means they look into what kind of organizations do they have, what kind of network do rescuers have. They don't care so much about who is rescued. And you have the opposite kind of starting point, which leads you to, for example, to acknowledge, oh, there were other Jews also involved in this endeavor. So I think that may be a really important kind of aspect when we think about Holocaust studies and rescue.
Yeah, thank you. I think, I mean, this is anecdotal at this point, but it seems like, I hate to like make generalizations, but I'll just put it this way. Many of the children who made their way to Lichtenbonn-sur-Lignon were put there by Jewish organizations. Many, maybe even most. So, I mean, that's, again, anecdotal, and it's just a few testimonies at this point, but it seems to be a finding for sure. So.
All right, well, thank you so much. I just want to offer our final thanks to Margie and Douglas Greenberg, who endowed the fellowship that brought you here, and thank you all for coming. We have an event in about a month that we're co-sponsoring with a Uyghur human rights activist and scholar who is screening a short documentary film that he made about his internment in a detention camp and the opportunity he had to confront a guard from the camp. So for information about that, please visit our website. And thank you all for coming. And thank you again, Chris.